Join the team at sport-social.co.uk.
Hello, welcome back to Red Devils Talk. We are back after a couple of weeks off. We are really excited to be back. Ciaran and Joe are with me as always. I hope you're all keeping safe and well. Manchester United have a new director of football and they have a technical director. I mean, look, something that we've been calling for a very, very long time. Something that no one expected to get, if I'm being completely honest with you. No one expected to get both on one day as well. Ciaran, welcome back, mate. What are your thoughts on the two new appointments?
It's about damn time. That's kind of what my main thought was when I saw it today, because it was kind of going crazy. And I guess, again, it just shows how kind of divided a fan base is, where half of the fans are really, really happy and the other half just want to criticize every little thing that's gone on before the two guys have even got into the roles. We've mentioned it on the show plenty of times that I think that the recruitment has improved over the last 12 to 24 months. But yeah, look, we'll see how they go over the next couple of seasons anyway. And that's all we can kind of look for. And look, we'll break it down now and kind of compare it to other teams today anyway.
Absolutely. And Joe, look, let's start with John Murtough. I'm going to call him John because I'm not really actually 100% sure how to pronounce his name, and I'm sure there's going to be a couple of people that are going to be butchering it. But let's start with him because look, he started his career as a sports scientist at Everton under David Moyes. So he came over with David Moyes, and he seemed to have worked his way up, sort of becoming head of performance, and he left in 2012, become head of elite performance at the Premier League, and then he followed David Moyes, and then he's sort of in that time become a bit of a close confidant with none other than Ed Woodward, which is quite interesting. And I think you're seeing a bit of a narrative come out in some respects. Some people who perhaps don't know enough about him. And look, I can't profess I've known a lot about him. Obviously, I've heard about him. I know he's done a lot of good work in the academy, and we'll come to Ciaran about the academy in a sec. But he's sort of worked with Woodward. He's been lavished with praise, as being someone that's helped put the pathway in place to produce McTominay, Rashford, Mason, all good talents. Particularly the last two. Mason can be whatever he wants to be. And looking at this appointment, what are your initial thoughts on it? Because I think that's the first thing I want to know, because I want to know where you sit on this, I guess, spectrum of views. And are you quite impressed with the club, that the fact that this has actually happened?
I guess I kind of sit on both sides of the fan base in a weird sort of way. I'm happy. I'm happy with the appointment. I think we've needed it. I'll also say you could argue it's probably 6-7 years too late. You could also say that. But I am happy with the appointment. How much changes? I'm not exactly sure. One thing I do like about the news, though, about the appointment today, and also some of the other aspects now about Darren being technical director. We've also heard about a new role for Matt Judge in terms of in charge of football negotiations. What I think it helps us do as a fan base, they probably won't appreciate this, but the fan base will, is we can start to pinpoint people now and hold more people accountable for certain aspects of transfers. So if you look over sort of the last 2 or 3 years, we've recruited well, but one area of weakness you would say would probably be our negotiating sort of skill, because we've taken too long to do certain deals. Obviously Jadon Sancho in the summer dragged on, didn't get done. You look at the Bruno Fernandes deal in the January, that took all month to do that deal, when really that was a deal that could have probably been done in the first week of the market. And I think at the time, if you remember, people were scratching around thinking, is this Ed Woodward? Is this the Glazers, not putting the money out? Is this Ed Woodward's negotiating skills? Is this a guy called Matt Judge, who I think we'll start to learn more about Matt Judge now, because I think Matt Judge has been sort of a mystery character in sort of United, and what is his actual role?
I mean, I don't know if anyone saw Laurie Whitwell's article today, and he is known as the almost the man in the shadows, the one that's actually pulling a lot of the strings. And I think a lot of fans automatically go in on Matt Judge. I'm not protecting him, by the way, because he is part of the wider problem. But I feel like there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding on actually what his role is. He's a negotiator, and that's it. And he doesn't decide what the price is, by the way. The Glazers will say, and we'll talk about the process in a minute of transfers. But yeah, go on, Joe. Let's talk about.
No, just that's my big takeaway from it. Sorry, that's my big takeaway from it. The fact that I just feel now as fans, we have a little bit more clarity about who's in charge of what aspect. So if we identify a player and that player turns out to be rubbish, so let's take the Donny van der Beek. That's probably a bit harsh to say rubbish, but somebody's identified Donny there, whether it be the manager or John Murtough, whether he's been involved. Because it's interesting to say, Ollie said that they've been working in this system actually for a while now. It's only just been announced today. They have been working in the system for a while. So what I'm saying is, if United identify a player, they get it done nice and swiftly like Donny, but then 12 months later, you're looking at a player like Donny, it's not working. At least we can look now. We can say, well, maybe Ollie's identified the wrong player there, John as well, and even Fletcher. They're all going to be in that sort of side of the deal. If a deal sort of takes a different direction, and it's a fantastic player, but it took too long to get it done, I think fans now can say, well, maybe that's on the negotiation side, that's on the Glazing side, that's on Ed Woodward's side of the checkoff. So I think that's the thing that I'm most positive about. I can look at a transfer now and I know who I'm praising and I know who's involved in the whole process from start to finish.
Yeah, it's a good point. Ciaran, I'm going to bring you in because I want to talk a bit more about John Murtaugh's, his progression, because I think people forget he was at Everton. And that's where he started as a data scientist or a data analyst. And he's very big on the data analytics, something that we've talked about in the summer. We always bring up the likes of Liverpool, Leicester City, all these clubs who you could say probably ran the best, who have probably the best recruitment. But you're looking at him. So he was at Everton. I think people forget that he was one of those in the team that found Wayne Rooney as a young lad. He's instrumental in bringing some talents to United. You've seen with Hannibal Mejbri. He along with one of the Norwegian scouts helped to bring him in. Look, Murtagh has 23 years of experience in football. He's been at the club for about 7 years. Most recently, sort of head of football development or that sort of role. Previously, head of elite performance at the Premier League. This isn't a guy. It's not like we've gone and said, right, Fletcher, you're going to be director of football, because that would have been a case for me to think you don't have any experience. This is a guy that's been in and around the game. He's been a scout. He understands the importance of analytics, data, a data-driven transfer policy. He understands that Manchester United need to go forward. Now, I'm not saying he's the best option out there. I'm just looking at the positives to it, because you have to break it down fairly. And I don't want to go with the narrative straight away, Ciaran. Oh, well, the Glazers are here, so that means nothing's going to happen. We'll talk about that in a minute, because that's important to talk about. But if we talk about some of the positives, and you think about it's someone who's been in the structure, he probably knows the problems. He's helped to revamp the academy, which is now really starting to bear some fruit. It's a couple of years before we see them. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, look, isn't the academy an example of what he can possibly do on a bigger scale if he gets the resources and the platform to do it?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it's not even just the academy. He's the one that did the entire recruitment for the Manchester United women's team, who are now excelling in the Premier League. So it's not like he's never done this before. And the one thing I look at is he's gone about it the right way. So he's had to go through that hard graft as a scout, coming through Everton, getting to pretty much the top to be the head of development there, then to be hired within the Premier League to be basically the head of the elite performance. Anybody doesn't just get that job. And so he actually left Everton before coming to Manchester United, and Moyes coming into Manchester United thought of him so much that he got him out of the Premier League to bring him to the club. And the one thing I always say is, if a team that goes through a lot of change, so a lot of different managers, and someone sticks with, what is it now, 4 different managers, you can probably tell that that person's pretty good at their job. And that's what I get from him, is that, and it's one thing that annoyed me today was that a lot of people were saying, oh, this is just reshuffling around because it's a hiring from within. But it's like you said, Haider, it's not like we're hiring Rio Ferdinand or Patrice Evra, who have never done anything in relation to the job. This guy he is scouted. He's been the head of performance. He's kind of ran a lot of the main projects over the last couple of years. We talk about the data science that we wanted Manchester United to improve on. He's the main person that actually put that to Ed Woodward and the club and said, this needs to improve. This is how it's going to happen. He's been working on that over the last couple of years. When you actually compare what he has done in English football to kind of the early careers of some of the better kind of directors of football out there right now, which we'll talk about a little bit later, there's actually a lot of similarities in how a successful director of football is. A lot of people assume a director of football's role is you buy the players, you sell the players. But that's not really it. You look at any of them that we're going to talk about later, and it's actually, how have you developed your own players? Have you brought in the right players coming in? When you look at some of the, and I know a lot of people are saying that, well, it's just somebody from within the club. But what people are forgetting is a couple of months ago, United actually interviewed 2 to 3 of the high-profile directors of football out there, and they decided not to do it. And that could be because a culture clash. If you want to keep kind of continuity with Solskjaer, that could have been a reason as well. So it's difficult to pinpoint just how successful they're going to be, because nobody knows. This is something that you're not going to be able to tell that this has worked in 2 to 3 seasons. This is something that, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to tell for a decade.
It's not something you can just see in 6 months' time. Well, I will say, Ciaran, okay, so we've got a few comments. Guys, thank you for all your comments. Whether you're happy about this or you're not, we want to hear them. We'll talk about them. Everyone can feel exactly how they want. That's completely fine. We want to break it down, and you can agree with us, you can disagree with us. It's completely fine. So we've got one here, United against Glazers. I love the name. I look at it as yes men, as realistically it goes to Woodward, who then needs to get a yes from Joel. And then another United against Glazers. I don't think you're related, but I don't think much will change, to be honest. The Glazers hold the purse strings. We had Gil, but transfer quality fell. We can't just rely on youth. Ciaran, I think that's a fair point. When you look at it, so you've mentioned that Manchester United interviewed 3 top director footballs. I'm assuming one of them was, in fact, Luis Campos, who hasn't exactly made his desire to take the United job. He's not exactly hidden his desire. He's very open, and he almost says what he would do if he came in. And he would have been a fantastic appointment. He's someone that would have been number 1 on my list, probably. You've got Paul Mitchell as well. There's a few others, but let's go for a positive and a negative slant. The positive for me is that there is now a structure in place, or we're looking to put a structure in place. You can't look at that in any other way, but you have to say, okay, yesterday we didn't have a director of football and technical director. Today we do. Okay, so that's how I like to look at it. We're taking everything out of it. Just look at it as cold, hard facts. Yesterday we didn't have any structure in place. Today we do. So that's a positive, right? So immediately you're on a positive step forward rather than where you were yesterday. The second point I do want to make is that Ollie's currently working with these people. Now, we've seen in the last couple of years, and I'm not exactly 100% on all the signings that have come in. I'm not 100%, let's say, on Maguire. I think that was a lot of money spent on a player that wasn't worth it. I think Wan-Bissaka is a good player, but again, when you're thinking about how Ollie wants to play, you got to think, why was he signed? When you want your fullbacks to be more progressive going forward. But when you're looking at the fact they've worked together, the fact that Fletcher's obviously had an impact since he's come in, Fletcher's also not the director of football. He's a technical director. What does that mean? When Matt Judge goes and does his negotiations, Fletcher will go with him. Last season, what was happening is you're sending Matt Judge in. He was trying to negotiate as if he was doing a business deal, which is different. You need a football man in there to talk about the footballing things, which means, Ciaran, that when Fletcher goes with Matt Judge to say, let's say Jadon Sancho, he's going to talk to Jadon Sancho about the club in a footballing way. Not just, oh, well, you know what? You can have the number 7 shirt. You can have this much money. You can have this sign-on bonus. Fletcher will talk about the culture of the club. He'll talk about what it means to be a Manchester United. We've got as fans, got to not look at it and just with our blinkers and think about the full picture. That United are now going to be going to negotiations with a football man, someone that's come through the academy. Surely that's a positive, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a huge positive. And actually, I wanted to pinpoint on your first point, which I think is probably the most important thing here. Because let's say this doesn't work. The fact that you now have a director of football and you have a technical director, if the individuals don't work, there's actually the position there where you can actually replace them, when before that didn't exist. So, like, for example, if it happens in 5 or 6 years and there's not a lot going on and you want improvements, well, you can, if you really wanted to get rid of them, and let's say you wanted one of these, like Luis Campos, that's like, I'm ready, I want to go to England, I want to be the director of football at Manchester United. Well, the position's there, the position's available. It's the same with the technical director. We've never had one. The other thing that I wanted to say as well is when we talk about, well, how much is going to change? Well, the one thing that I always have in my mind is, well, some of these guys, especially when we talk about John Murtough, who was part of, let's say, Solskjaer's team for kind of putting together a list of players. There's a difference between when you're there and when you're in charge, because when you're in charge, you're the one that's making the decisions. And the whole point, and the one thing that I got from the interview today that I actually really like to see, was that he's the point of contact between clubs. That's not with Ed Woodward. That, okay, maybe Ed Woodward is the closest person to the Glazers, but he's not the one that's going.
Or he is the one who, in essence, is a gatekeeper for the purse strings. I think that's a fair comment from people here, saying, who are coming out with that sort of view that we might have Murtagh in there, we might have Darren Fletcher, but ultimately Ed Woodward still is on that commercial side. He's still involved in the money side of things. Yeah,
which personally I don't care about, because Ed Woodward is actually good at his job when it comes to the commercial side of things. He knows how to make deals. He knows how to make the club money. Regardless of if Ed Woodward was there or not, if they came out today and said Ed Woodward is fired, right, and John Murtough's taken over, he would still have to go to the Glazers. So just because you hate the Glazers and can't stand them isn't a reason to hate this move, because the one thing you need to remember, it's not going to be Ed Woodward going out and trying to buy these players. That's gone. That doesn't happen anymore. And to a certain extent, early on, he was terrible at his job, Ed Woodward, when we were talking about under Moyes, under Louis van Gaal. But once it started to change under Solskjaer, you've actually seen United be a little bit better in the transfer market. Now, the biggest problem that you mentioned, which was your second point, was the fact that when we had Matt Judge going by himself, he's a negotiator, and that's really all he does. He should just be someone negotiating deals. Just so everybody knows, every club has that. Every single one. It's not the director of football or technical director that's the one actually negotiating wages or a transfer fee or these agent fees.
To do it. It's like lawyers. Yeah. The lawyers are the ones that draft all the contract, you know what I mean? So it's, yeah.
So the difference is that I think because of United not getting the high-profile player over the last year, in essence, Jadon Sancho, more people now know about Matt Judge. When really, we don't know about the business guys on the other top teams, because when the other top teams get it, it all goes to the director of football, the sporting director, all the credit does, and really all the blame does. The fact is, because Manchester United didn't have people in those positions, it was confusing and nobody knew what was going on. And people were seeing, hearing stories that Ed Woodward's not as involved anymore. But then we hear the name Matt Judge and we're saying, well, then what's he doing? And all the blame went to him, when really it should be a collaborative effort. And now that there's a bit of a structure in place, like Joe said earlier, now people will know who's in charge of what. And honestly, I think it's a joke that wasn't there prior to now, because any professional organization in sports has that. You can go to any sport. They all have it set out. Might be different names. You look at the American sports and you'll have kind of the head of football operations and the general manager. That's basically the director of football and the technical director. It's just a different name. But finally, it looks like Manchester United are getting back into kind of 2021 where teams should have these roles. So what you said in the first point was perfect. It's at least these roles are actually there at the club now.
Yeah, look, fantastic points. And what I do actually want to say as well, look, I'm not naive, and neither are any of my panelists today. They're not naive enough to think suddenly now we've got a director of football. That means we're going to sign the players we want. Look, that's what I just want to clarify here, because there's so many more issues. We know what the Glazers are, and myself, Ciaran, and Joe will do a Glazer episode. We were meant to do it a couple of weeks ago, but we will do it, and we'll break down the finances, and we'll give full visibility and clarity, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions going around in terms of people protecting the Glazers, and they are absolutely the issue. They are the reason that I sometimes wake up in the morning and I'm so deflated. I say to the boys in the group chat, I'm so deflated. Why? Because I don't see the positive, like the silver lining, in the clouds. I don't see that under this ownership. I really don't. I'm quite, I'll be honest with you, like full authenticity here, talking from the heart. And these boys know this. In the last couple of weeks, I've been really low on Man United. Really, really low. I said, look, and I know we won against Man City and that was great, but I'm struggling with the enjoyment. Why? Because when I'm looking at the bigger picture, I'm like, well, as soon as the Glazers, as soon as I think about the Glazers, that's it for me. We're not gonna be where we want to be unless something drastic happens. But what I am happy to see, and I'm not talking about the personnel that have come in, Joe. I am happy to see that actually we do have two roles created here, and that's important. And I want to go through the roles a little bit. So there are reports that Murtagh will, he'll sort of focus on player recruitment. So straight away, Ed Woodward is not going to pick the players. Ed Woodward never picked the players, really, if I'm being completely honest with you. And this is not me protecting Ed Woodward. I can't stand the bloke. I can't stand the Glazers, but he didn't pick the players. One of the biggest issues, Joe, with the process, no other big club operates like this. And this is where my anger is. So you have Ole Gunnar Solskjaer wants Jadon Sancho. So he had to go up to Ed Woodward, I believe. Was it Ciaran? Is it to Matt Judge, to Ed Woodward, to Joel Glazer, who's sitting there in Florida, wherever he is, signing off? By the time it goes back to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, oh no, we can't buy him, half the summer's gone. And that's my biggest problem. Now, Joe, Murtagh will come in and, he's sort of, firstly, he will focus on recruitment and he'll ensure that the first team has all the operational support required. And then him and Ollie will work together. And then, sort of the analysts and the networks below, the scouts will all report to Murtagh and he'll be the bridge between. Does it eliminate, though, the issue that's there? Because the issue for me wasn't necessarily, I'm not saying Woodward's not the problem, but he still works for the Glazers. The Glazers say yes or no. Woodward doesn't say yes, this price, yes, that price. The Glazers will say, no, you can have this much money for Sancho. You can't have this much. So does it actually eliminate any of the problems, really? Because at the end of the day, if you got one man sitting there in Florida who doesn't really give a rat's ass about what's going on, then, does much change?
Yeah, now, look, at the end of the day, in terms of the finances, the Glazers have got what they've got and they'll spend what they want to spend. And that doesn't, you can put different roles in place. That won't change that. They'll have a budget in the summer, and whether this role existed or it didn't, that was always going to be the budget anyway. But I think, look, let's try and be positive about this. And what it does do is it just gives United maybe a direction now and an identity in terms of they know where they want to go now. So you would hope this is why I don't understand why. I mean, Ciaran touched on it earlier in terms of this director of football, and people just think it's to do with transfer and everything like that. The clue's in the title, director of football. Football, it's a massive aspect of the club. It's not, you don't define football by transfers. It's not, if it was that, then he'd be director of recruitment, wouldn't he? You know what I mean? It's It's director of football, and there's so many different aspects of a football club that you need that obviously he'll have to look after. So I mean, actually, recruitment's just a tiny part of his job at the end of the day, you know, compared to everything else that'll be going on.
I mean, it's the you make that's a great point, because at the end of the day, you know, we talk about, and I think this is the FIFA generation that makes everything about transfers, because United have got way more problems. They haven't got a structure in the club. You know, if Ole Gunnar Solskjaer leaves tomorrow, Joe, and this is the whole point of why I wanted a director of football.
Yeah, there you go. That's exactly what I was just going to touch on. The fact that, look, there will be a new manager one day, whether that's next year or it's in 10 years' time. And this is what this does. It hopefully gives United an identity so that they know, they know that the type of manager and coach that they're going to want to employ next. We hope from this now, we hope that, you know, part of John's job and Darren Fletcher's job is to create a framework and an infrastructure of a way that United want to play their football over the next 10 years. Do they want to be a high-pressing, high-intensity, possession-based team like, you know, Gegenheim press team like Jurgen Klopp? Do they want to be a more tiki-taka sort of base team like a Pep Guardiola? Do they want to try and get back to some sort of United old way where they play with more traditional wingers and they play on counter-attack transition, as we've seen? All these different things. You want these people, Fletcher and Murtagh, to look at what we've got now, look at the way football, look at the patterns in football, look at the way the top teams are playing and how they're being successful, create that identity, create that structure. And then what you do is you bring coaches in that can deliver that method of football. But not only coaches, you bring in players, you bring in backroom staff, even down to sports scientists and physios who can deal with players who play in that way and understand that. Say, for example, if you want to play a high intensity pressing game, your sports science has to be tip top because you have to make sure you look after players more and things like that. You know, everybody has to be used to working in an environment where those sort of tactics have been employed somewhere else at a club previously. And I think that that's what this does. Hopefully, not so much an identity just to the team, but to the club, and that can move forward now for the next 10 years. Problem is, we spent 6-7 years behind the 8 ball, so we've got a lot catching up to do, Haider.
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on. Guys, there's a lot of new people here. Thank you so much for joining us. Look, if you really like our content, if you like what we talk about, we make sure that we're not reactionary. We try and give as much information, you know, well-researched views as possible. Please smash the subscribe button. That'd be really great. Look, Ciaran, let's sort of break down actually the two appointments and let's do it sort of black and white here. So we spoke about Murtagh. Obviously, he's got a lot of experience. He hasn't been a director of football, so that's something to take into account. You know, and there are comments. I mean, I spoke to Canton, our colleague. He's got a comment here. I'm not sure if he's in the comments. He might have just put this. I know he had to rush out, but he said that for the Judge and Murtagh internal appointments means that Woodward and the Glazers are content with business as usual. All that happened is that the roles have been repackaged. I've seen this going around Twitter today. I'll be honest with you, when the news first came out, my first questions were, is this a role by title rather than is this a role by the role? You know, are they just appeasing the fans? Because what we've seen over the last, I would say, month, obviously we've beaten City now and everyone seems to have forgotten about everything. That's a bit of a problem for me as well, because there's so many issues. We see so many briefs. We've seen so much about, we're going to look to get Haaland and Sancho this summer. It's all rubbish. It's all absolutely rubbish. We've got 110 million off the bottom line at the club, no match day revenue. And then obviously we're having to contend with the owners that we have. So I think sometimes what happens is, as a fan base, we've been so deprived over the last 7-8 years that any little bit of news we rush to the positive sometimes, and conversely as well, sometimes we do it with a negative as well. We can do straight away. You'll see something and you'll go, oh well, this is rubbish, nothing will change. Fickle fan base is right. United against Glazers, you know, that's how it is. And look, everyone does it. I do it. Everyone does it. But when you look at Murtagh, no director of football, and for me, I'd be thinking, look, there were top director of footballs, or there are top director of footballs out there. They will 100% want to take this job. I know the structure's not there yet. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing you think about Fletcher as well, you know, are we bringing people in that, and this is devil's advocate, but, you know, it's a fair comment, who supposedly, because they know Manchester United, we're maybe negating the importance of credentials. You know, Has he been in a technical director role? He has not. And for example, look, his role will be to, as we said earlier, he'll go in and be an experienced figure in transfer negotiations. He's never been in transfer negotiations, has he? So, it's not like we're thinking about Van der Sar, for example. Van der Sar moved up. He started as a marketing director at Ajax, and he moved his way up. And by the way, he's not the director of football. That's Mark Overmars, and we'll talk about him later because he's an interesting one. I'm a big fan of the work he's done. So that's a possible, concern, I think, looking at Fletcher and thinking, well, he's never been in transfer negotiations. He can maybe relate on the United level, but does he really have? And look, I'm just looking at it from the outside view. Does he really have what it takes? And then you're going in there with Matt Judge, who, as we've seen, isn't exactly, the most popular, I would say, person right now in the United fan base. So is that a cause for concern? You're looking at it and you're thinking, great, United have gone and actually sorted out a big problem we've had for years. They've actually gone and appointed people, and clearly they're working with Oli now, but are they best in class? Because that's what I talk about with Manchester United. Best in class. Manchester United have the best stadium, the best manager, the best players, the best fans. Everything Man United should have best in class because we're Manchester United. Do you think it's fair, perhaps, that people are questioning the ability, or they're saying, we could have maybe got better?
Yeah, you can definitely argue that point that yes, we could have gotten somebody from outside. But again, I go back to this whole point of you can bring in someone from outside. That doesn't mean it's going to work. And I'll give you one big example. At Roma recently, they tried to bring in Monkey from Sevilla. It didn't work. The players he brought in didn't fit the system, didn't fit the club, and he went back to Sevilla. So it's all well and good doing that. Personally, I always prefer when you actually can build from within because it's long-term and it's more sustainable. Because, look, you could bring in, I know one of the other names that was the Atletico Madrid's director of football, Andre Berta. Look, that can be another one where you bring them in, you start seeing kind of these things happening at the club, and then suddenly he wants to go back to Spain. Or you see the same thing with Luis Campos, who went to Monaco and then goes to Lille. What happens if he has a really good time at Manchester United and then suddenly Paris Saint-Germain offer him a job? Is he going to stay? So there's definitely a course of action that you say it should be the best in class, but the best in class doesn't mean you have to go to someone who's already a director of football somewhere else. Sometimes it is taking a gamble on somebody that maybe hasn't been a director of football but has served in a lot of other different roles that has excelled at his job. And that's what I think that United have done for the director of football role. They've rewarded someone who has done a good job at the club, that you've seen the impact of the academy already. We've seen just how much better it's been in the past year or two. The players that have been brought in have been United have probably been one of the best academies in the past 24 months in terms of recruitment. And then I look at it, and United started their women's team where they would have been pretty much at the bottom, had nothing there, and he was able to recruit some English internationals. He's brought in two of the American players as well from the international team there. And the fact is, he's seen how to do it. That's what other people are forgetting. It's not just the first team that he's going to be head of. It's what Joe mentioned earlier. It's all football. This includes the academy, the first team, the women's team, all the way up. So that's one thing that we have to kind of get involved with. And you need to make sure that whoever you're bringing in does know the culture of the club, because you need to be able to bring in the type of players that fit what United want to do in the long term. You can't just say, right now we need a striker, so we want a director of football that will just bring in a striker. Because okay, you can bring in a striker like we did with Robin van Persie. He's here for 4 years and he's gone. You need to be able to bring in players that can develop long term. When we talk about some of these brilliant director of footballs, you mentioned one in Luis Campos, right? What is he best known as? He's best known as actually bringing through a lot of the young talent in Monaco. Yeah. We see Mbappe,
the gems,
Lamar. Yeah. Martial, all of those players. Essentially, what we're looking at here is the same sort of thing that we look at John Murtough, and his background is the development of academy football players. We've seen it. You mentioned it with Everton with Wayne Rooney. We've seen it recently. He was one of the first people that went and looked at Hannibal Mejbri, and he was an integral part of bringing him to Manchester United. So it goes back to the point that we made earlier in the show, that the director of football is not just the person that's going to sign players for the first team. It's not just going out, we want to buy Jadon Sancho. Here's 120 million. That's us. We want to sell this player. It's so short-sighted, I believe.
Well, I was just going to say
actually a lot to it.
I was going to say quickly, just to add to it, it's a great point, but I was just going to say, does Murtagh change the fact that we signed Sancho last summer? No, because it wasn't on him. It was on whether the Glazers were willing to release the funds, and they weren't. So you could have
They'd identified the player, Haider. They'd identified Solskjaer, and even probably John Murtough back then was probably involved in this. I mean, one thing I do slightly disagree with, Haider, and just jump in, is the fact that you're saying yesterday we didn't have this structure, today we did. No, today we know about this structure. Yesterday we didn't. I think this structure had actually been in place for quite a while in a weird sort of way. And I think what happened last summer is United did identify the right players. It's just now whoever was in charge of releasing the money, handing the money over, negotiating the deal, didn't do their job properly. This is what I said at the top of the show. At least we know now who these people are. And I just want to say quickly, this idea of being a rebranding and a repackaging of what we already got is absolute BS. And I'll tell you where it's coming from. It's coming from that man, Mark Goldbridge at United stand, because I've heard clips of him today going on about it. And it's catching the fan base. And I'll tell you something, the only reason he's worried, guys, is because United are heading in a good direction, doing the right things. Therefore, there's going to be less to be negative about at the football club. And therefore, he won't have a product if that continues in that way. He won't have such a attractive product. So that is where this idea of rebranding and repackaging is coming from. It's rubbish. The club are trying to be proactive now. Yes, too late. I get that. But I think it's just too simple to say it's rebranding, repackaging. That's people who are actually worried that the club are actually doing something right for a change.
Yeah, I agree on that one, Joe. The only thing I would say is it doesn't take a genius to figure out that Jadon Sancho is a great player. Where I look at it is actually the other one that we didn't get was Jude Bellingham, where they identified him and they did everything they could. And look, at the end of the day, Dortmund were able to offer him more playing time, so he went to Dortmund. So there's going to be certain reasons you don't get players. But for me, it's about identifying players before they become superstars, so you don't have to spend 120 million. And those deals don't get really, really tricky. It's the reason why they signed Amad Diallo, because they believe in him. They believe that within 5 or 6 years that he's going to be at that level, and they brought him in early. And that's what I want to see. You look at under Ferguson, the amount of players we brought in before they hit that level. But then post-Ferguson, we're trying to buy these players when they're already superstars, when it's the hardest point to actually get these players. And that's the biggest thing I think that this does, is it gives United the platform. Look, like I said earlier, I think there's a big difference for me of Murtagh working with Solskjaer, working with Judge, working with Ed Woodward, and being part of a process that identifies and tries to bring players to the club, versus when you're the man that is actually the point of contact for all this. People have to remember that it was put out that Judge, Solskjaer report to John Murtough, and so does Darren Fletcher. So there is a difference. Darren Fletcher wasn't involved before, so his job was non-existent. So there are slight differences. Does that mean we're going to see a big difference in the transfer market over the next 2 or 3 years? Probably not. Because again, like we said, it is going to be a fairly similar system. There is still a lot of people there. But what happens is the director of football now, who will talk to Ollie the majority of the time, and they'll have a very close relationship. It'll basically go from him, maybe possibly to Woodward. We haven't been told that. And that's why one of the things I said today is they really needed to do a press conference today, and they needed to allow the media to ask questions to really make it clear what is that chain of command. If it's from Murtagh to the Glazers, well, then it works, and it's actually a lot more efficient. If it's Murtagh to Woodward to the Glazers, okay, you've probably knocked out having to go through so many different obstacles, but there are still obstacles there. For me, it's a positive, but again, you can't get ahead of yourself because we don't actually know how it's going to work.
Too many, Ciaran. I've seen too many people. Just because we've had this discussion today, obviously us three, but I've seen too many people say, "Oh, he's the United through and through, Mancunian through and through." Well, I know Fletcher's Scottish, but people have said this always from the academy, all this sort of stuff, and I'm like, look, that actually has almost zero bearing to what happens outside the club. Just because you're not United through and through. Look, some of the best director of footballs never played football, and we'll talk about that in a sec. You know, all these sort of things. There's so many people that are just equating, right, so Fletcher knows the club. Like, I'm not picking on anyone here, by the way, Chigs. I'm going to read out your comment you said here. I'm bringing in Cantona to help with the overall all-day running of the club. What qualifications does he have to do that? He does Cronenberg adverts. Like, he does beer adverts. I love Eric. Right. Everyone.
He'll be signing a seagull next week.
Yeah,
exactly. He's a good actor. Maybe he could fool us with his acting. Everything's all rosy at the club when it's actually not.
Exactly. But you know what I'm trying to say here, that you got to have ex-players in there. We talk about footballing men in footballing positions. Well, Fletcher is a footballing man in a footballing position because he's a technical director. And again, United's technical director is different to a technical director, for example, at Monaco. They're different roles because there's different people in different areas. But this is the thing. We need to also not go, bring this player in. It's rubbish. Like Nicky Butt, someone that I was like, why is he coming in? Has absolutely transformed the academy. I've seen a couple of comments say, he should have got the job. Leave him where he is. He's doing a great job. And remember as well, Murtagh he's not the first person, is not necessarily the long-term plan. Like we said, we've been talking about Luis Campos. The fact that United have got someone like Murtagh in, it's almost like a test run. Like, he could actually, he's obviously, he could go on and be the best director of football in the world if he wanted to be, and he might have the ability to. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. But the reality is that if United have a structure in place now, and Murtagh does this for 2 or 3 years, they can turn around and go to the Andrea Bertas, the Monchis of the world, and say, right, we've got a structure in place. You're not coming in having to build everything because there's already people that have come here and done it before you. So it's an easier transition. It's got to be the long-term thinking, but bringing in ex-players and shoehorning them here and there. That's why I was never for the idea, Ciaran, of Evra, ever. Never, ever. One, he can't keep his mouth shut. He goes and tells every secret he wants on TV. And I'm not convinced about his footballing or business acumen. I would never want someone like Roy Keane as manager. I'd like him as a coach. I think he'd be good. But do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, it's just like, bring all these ex-players in, it'll be great. That's not how it works. Football doesn't work like that. So you got to be clever. We need some more footballing men, or we need some better. And the best footballing men, Ciaran, are not necessarily the ones that played and had an illustrious career, are they?
Usually it's actually the opposite. Usually it's the ones that didn't get to the top level. So that, or it's either that or somebody who's actually suffered a devastating injury that actually had to analyze the game from the side. That's why you actually see a lot of players that were on the bench become really good in terms of being in the kind of front office or becoming coaches, because they had to understand the game. They had to watch the game a lot. When you're constantly playing, you do stuff without even thinking, and that's the difference. The one thing I think of is, because the one outside person that I thought had a chance for the job was Luis Campos, because he's come out and he said that he would like it, but he wasn't ready to move to England at the time. I often wonder, is it the fact that this has happened now, is he can now look at really what the role entails, and is it something that he would be interested in, and then maybe in the long term that happens. I also think is there a possibility that, I know it was maybe 6 months to a year ago, I know because we've been talking about this for 2 years now, that there were, I know Berta, I knew Campos, and there was somebody else. It might have been Paul.
It was Angelo. Wasn't it Angelo Henrique, the one that used to be at PSG?
That's it. Yeah, they all interviewed initially for it. Now, I know, I think it was Berta and Campos, they interviewed in January. Now, then the pandemic hit in March. So I often wonder, is maybe one of those didn't actually move over because, look, you don't know what the kind of security is in a new job, and maybe they wanted to stay in. Now the fact that we have this open, they can actually see it from afar and see, well, what role does the director of football have? Think about it. If they go and they're in negotiations for any player within Manchester United now, they'll know exactly how it works. So if it's something that they'd be interested in, well, then later on that might happen. I completely agree with what you said earlier. Manchester United should be shopping at the top shelf, that they should be going for top managers, top players, top executives. But again, you have to start from somewhere. You can't just expect that, oh, we're going to do the director of football and then suddenly Edwin van der Sar is going to come in. That's not the way it works, because people who have really good jobs aren't going to take a new job that has just been created because they don't know what the role actually entails. But then once they see it and they see, well, what did this person get to do? Did they just fail at their job, or were they not given kind of the responsibility that a job of that title entails? So I think that's an important point that, again, like I said, and it's going to be difficult for fans to actually get used to, is this isn't going to be something that you can analyze over a 2 to 3 year period. It's probably between 5 to 10 years that until you're going to see actual results. It was the same thing at Liverpool, same thing at Juventus, same thing at Monaco. It takes time, and unfortunately we're not going to notice for, like I said, the next 5 to 10 years.
Ciaran, I'm going to come to you in a second, Joe, but you make a great point, about, you have to remember as well that when we're all people that obviously we all have jobs and stuff. And for example, let's say you're in your current job. This is how I think of it. It's made me think of, a scenario. You've said if a job's been created, there's no guarantee that person will come. The person also has to think intrinsically. Think about Edwin van der Sar. He's done such a fantastic job. By the way, he's not the director of football. He's a CEO. I know you know.
Yeah.
Just say he's CEO. And there's a question here saying about Van der Sar from Jay saying, but wasn't Edwin selected as director of football because he understood the Ajax DNA? He's not director of football. He started as a marketing director.
He's a CEO. Yeah.
But he was selected because of DNA. But they've also got a structure that is just miles and miles ahead, and it's geared towards football. The ambition, Ajax's models about developing and having the best academy in the world and selling them for large amounts of money. Like it's apples and oranges. You can't compare United's structure to them. But when you look at Manchester United, Joe, think about Edwin van der Sar. Let's say he got offered a United job. He intrinsically will think, why should I take this job when I've done a fantastic job at Ajax? I'm really well respected in the footballing world. I'll go to Man United, and what if it fails and goes absolutely terribly? And then everyone thinks Edwin van der Sar's rubbish. We see it all the time. We see it with footballers that come into the club. Great where they were, then they come to Man United, they're rubbish, and then everyone thinks they're rubbish again. Then they go off and have a good career. It's happened to Lukaku. At the moment, there's a problem at the club where it doesn't matter what level, and this is what we're trying to get out of. Whatever level someone comes in, whether it's the manager, whether it's above, or whether it's in the academy, or even the players, there's something rotten at the club which is making them look worse. It's not really an environment I've found over the last 7 years. We're making progress now, but it's an environment where you come and flourish, is it? And so that's what you've got to change. I mean, and that's why I want to come on to some of the director of footballers, around sort of Europe and stuff like that, because there's a comment here from Zane. I'm just trying to find it. Thank you for your comments, guys. Honestly, it's been fantastic. Engagement's been great tonight. So you were talking about Beppe Marotta. Yeah, look, he's done a fantastic job. He did a great job at Juventus. You're saying he made whole changes to the Juventus team. 11 players out, 11 players in. And Inter Milan, he's done the same. And now Inter are top of the league. There's so many factors you're completely ignoring here. Firstly, that Juventus have the Agnelli family that own them. We have the Glazers. The Agnelli family own Fiat, Ferrari. They've owned Juventus now for years. His granddad, Andrea Agnelli's granddad, bought Juve. It gets passed down the family. They are Torino's. Torino, yeah, they are Turin. That's what they are. They live and breathe Juventus. It's their club. It's their club. It's part of the fabric. They're part of it. So you can't compare that. The second point I want to make is that everyone just assumes the director of football is incredible. We look at Monchi. Everyone's like, oh, Monchi's the best. Monchi's going to come into Man United and do the same. Think about everyone behind him, all the data analytics team, the owners. There's so many different stakeholders that basically judge and and basically set up the director of football as the person that gets all the praise. But there's so many people behind the scenes that are doing a lot of the work. So this is why I think, we need to be careful of saying we should bring this director of football and that one in, because if you haven't got the structure in place, Joe, it doesn't really matter. And I want to run through a few of them before we wrap up. We've got 10 minutes left. So let's talk about a few that were ex-footballers. You got Mikhail Zorc, obviously at Borussia Dortmund, who's undoubtedly one of the best. Like, I don't think anyone can deny it. He's a bit of a plum, but he's undoubtedly one of the best. We got Monchi, we've spoken about. Bergerstein before at Manchester City, also an ex-player. Salihamidzic, who we mentioned off air, Mark Overmars. These are all ex-players. I understand people get excited saying, "Oh, well, look, these ex-players have done that." But the importance of the structure is king, isn't it? It's like in football, like on the pitch, you can have 11 of the best players. Doesn't mean it will work. You've got to have a system in place. You've got to have a manager that get the most out of it. I mean, people are saying in the comments, Ralf Rangnick. Absolutely. Ralf Rangnick is the best in the business, bar none. And he's also a really good manager. I mean, he's created Hasenhüttl, he's Nagelsmann. There's someone else I'm forgetting now. Jesse Marsch as well. There's a few others, that he's helped with this Red Bull sort of franchise. It's almost like the blueprint for anyone that wants to come into football, any professional sport, and make something out of it. But looking at it right now, Joe, if Murtagh and Fletcher can, and obviously with Ollie's help as well, put something in place, there's no reason why whoever comes in after is going to reap the rewards. Because I still think that, as Ciaran said, this is a long-term thing. I'm not expecting to see changes straight away. The Glazers are an issue, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, or we can't get excited perhaps, or happy at the fact that, you know what? Yeah, we know the big problem, but we're trying to do something about it.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, there's successful clubs out there, Haider, that are still not happy with their owners. I don't think there's times when Liverpool fans have gripes with FSG, because of the amount of investment and things like that, even though they have done brilliant. I mean, as much as I hate to admit it, you look at that Liverpool model and the way that they've worked, in the couple of years leading up to, obviously, Jurgen getting the job, and since Jurgen's got the club, the way that they've done things, you can't fault them. But, everyone will always have gripes with their owners. But look, football is such a football club is such a delicate machine at the end of the day, and it only takes one small cog not to be working properly, and the whole thing falls down. So, you can have the best recruitment in the world. You can have the best, analyst. You can have the best director of football. You can even have the best coach. But at the end of the day, it'll all boil down to what happens on that sort of 100 yards green bit in the middle of a stadium, you know what I mean? And if it doesn't, if the players, if it doesn't work, if it's not, it's something's not quite right, it'll always break down. It just needs one area of a football club not to be working properly for the whole thing to go. And it's interesting what you say when you look at other clubs and the way they do it, because I think this director of football, sporting director, it works differently in different countries. So I think, you've talked a lot about some guys that work in Germany. I think there's so many well-run clubs in Germany. So I think that's the best place to look at. I think if you look in Germany, there's likes of Bayern Munich, RB Leipzig, Borussia Dortmund. You can say what you want about the guys there, but I think they are very well-run clubs. And actually, when you look at what they do, a lot of the people that they employ over there are actually former players of the club, and therefore you look back to how United are doing it and you're thinking, well, maybe that's what United are looking at, because you got Salihamidzic, obviously, who's at Bayern now. He was a club legend. I think Oliver Kahn's involved at Bayern now, isn't he? Obviously, he's a club legend there. Zorc, you talked about at Dortmund, and things like that. And I just think that it all depends where in Europe you look to this role, because I think it works differently. I think in England a lot of clubs have tended to go for maybe sort of unusual names, maybe not ex-players, if you know what I mean. You look at likes of Dan Ashworth at Brighton. Stuart Webber's another one at Norwich.
Yeah, he's done a great job.
He's done a fantastic job at Norwich. These people, they're not household names. Paul Mitchell, Southampton and Tottenham, and I think that this is the problem with it. I think you can look around for different examples, but I think it works very differently in different countries, and it's tough. It's tough to sort of draw examples from these people because I think it's different the way they go about it, and these clubs are owned differently as well. Don't forget the German clubs are always majority owned by their fans as well, which obviously has a factor in how they run as well and the people that they choose to have at their football clubs.
Great points. Ciaran, I'm come to you for the last 5 minutes. We've got a comment here from Nick saying it's okay to not like the Glazers, folks. You can support United and not be happy with the ownership. I don't think anyone in this chat is happy with the ownership at all. I think look, we have good sort of interaction on Twitter. I think what you need to possibly think about, I'm not telling you what to do, it's just a suggestion, is try and maybe distinguish, or differentiate between what the Glazers do and what they have an input in and what they don't. Because at the end of the day, and I hate the Glazers, and I don't know if you were here earlier on, I did say, I'm very down about United. I really think until they go, if they ever go, we're never gonna hit where we want to be. But you also got to remember, like, they don't coach the team, and I hate them, but they don't coach the team. They don't do team selection. They don't also necessarily choose the players, because I don't know where this has come from as well. They don't look at it like that. They'll look at it and think, right, Jadon Sancho, 120 million. Is he worth it? Let's do the numbers. No, he's not. They don't look at him and think, right, Jadon Sancho is this sort of player. He's going to do this. What they're going to start. They don't care. And you can have an issue with that. I have an issue with that. There's no ambition. There's no footballing acumen. But when the club are looking to try and change something, I think you have to sometimes, look at some of the positives in it. They are trying to. Will it be a success? We don't know. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you it is going to be a success. I'm not going to tell you that I'm expecting a change tomorrow, because it's not going to happen. But to be down about everything and to blame everything on them, like at the end of the day, if United lost 3-0 to City, that's on Ollie and the boys. That doesn't mean I'm a Glazer apologist. I will do a podcast slating them. And I'm not like these other big channels who don't slate the Glazers because they want to get in on them. I don't care. I will slate them till the cows come home, because they are the biggest problem at this club. But what I will say is, every little issue or everything, we go Glazers this, Glazers that. At the end of the day, there are other functions of the club that need to work. We've got a direct football. Are they puppets that are coming in, Ciaran? We don't know. But to automatically assume as well is just as wrong as me to say, oh, well, it's going to be a complete success. It's got to be a bit of a balance, guys. Come on.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's like I've noticed that every single time we lose, the first 24 hours it's Ollie out, and then the next 24 hours it's all the people slagging off the Ollie outers, saying this is all the Glazers' fault. When it's kind of all in one. Yeah, the Glazers aren't great owners because how they purchase the club, and they don't put a load of their own money into the club. But I mentioned it not last week, a couple of weeks ago, that they are not the ones that make football decisions. They hire people to make those decisions. Okay, so it can come back on them saying they hired the wrong people. Fine, they made a bad decision. That doesn't mean that all they're trying to do is take everything from the club. It's not like they're paying people very little. That's what I try and come at, is that there's no like in other sports, there's no salary cap floor, to where if they wanted to just bring in players and managers for a very small amount, they could do that if they wanted to, but they don't. They actually do spend money. Do they spend as much as the club earn? No. And that's where we say that they're not great owners. And that's what I'm saying, is we're never going to be like Bayern Munich or Barcelona, who have a new president now, or you look at many other teams around Europe that the fan base does have a bit more of an insight. But you can't just go and blame the Glazers for everything. Just looking at, because I look at so many other sports, and when I look at the Glazers, I look at Tampa Bay, who were terrible for years. The Glazers changed absolutely nothing about how they operate, but they fired a GM, brought in a new GM, fired a coach, brought in a new coach, brought in a couple of new players. Look, one of them was Tom Brady. You improve that and suddenly they win. it's not that the Glazers changed how they operated. It's the people that they hired were different, and those people were good at their jobs.
In the day-to-day, they're the biggest thing here. Look, there's a comment here, Ciaran. Look, Nick, what I will say is that it's not really healthy to be like that angry about the Glazers all the time. Like, it's not worth it on your health. Like, they are. Look, I'm not saying to accept it. I'm not saying that, but like, it's just not healthy, man. Like, I'm someone that is. I've let it get to me all the last summer. You boys remember, I was so angry about Sancho. You know, and I was so angry about Sancho. I had a fight with Paulie on a stream about Sancho. That's how much. But I just think we got to take more of a logical approach. And look, there's a comment here. Look, we know that the 1 billion spent on transfers is not the Glazers' money, so I'm not saying it is. But the point still remains here. It's fair. Look, poor footballing decisions. Who's to blame for putting Woodward there? It is the Glazers, 100%. Yeah. But they're not the one. Like, Woodward's got autonomy to do stuff. Woodward's a problem. Will they be a puppet? Look, there's a few comments here saying they're going to be a puppet. Absolutely. I think, absolutely. I think that's a fair comment. Like, I really do, because
it's a possibility. Yeah.
But like,
you can only say that Woodward's half to blame, because at the end of the day, Haider, Woodward's done a lot of good for this football club. People won't like to hear that, but from a financial, commercial, and look, we're living in COVID times now, and people take the mick out of those sponsorship deals that he's done with noodle companies and things like that. But they're keeping us afloat. They're allowing us to run as a proper football club while there's absolutely no income coming in. So Woodward, from the footballing point of view, disaster. But Woodward, from a football club point of view, and running as a business, and whether you like it or not, guys, football is a business right now. He has done a fantastic job, and you have to balance that argument out with that side of it. And the Glazers will always look at the football and always look at the business.
Yeah. And what I will say as well is that I openly criticize Ollie, and I've done it last week, for how he protects them. Because, to turn around and say in the summer, Ciaran, I'll bring this to you before we wrap up, to turn around in the summer and say that there won't be anything to spend. I understand what he's doing. I understand he's trying not to do a Woodward and say we've got this X amount to spend. We know that. Okay, we know that. But there's a way of saying it. And I've criticized Ollie for it, because why are you protecting them? Because ultimately, if we have another summer, by the way, I don't think we're going to go and sign Haaland and everything. I think we might sign Sancho. I really do. But I don't think anyone else it's going to come. I'm not getting my hopes up.
It's the hope that killed you, mate. It's the hope that killed you.
Yeah, I do think Sancho will end up coming to the club. I think that, all the pointers are there, and I think United can get that done.
I also think that with all this change, that they want to have a marquee signing this summer, because they've done this, so they can show this has worked. Look at who we just signed. Yeah. So I would be surprised if you don't see a big name join in the summer, because look, we've seen enough kind of credible rumors that something's probably going to happen. You probably see Sancho and a centre back come in. That's, if I had to make a guess, that's what it is. My whole point on the Glazers has been, and I've never been a fan of the Glazers, but I'm also realistic, where I have said it many times that hashtags and things that we say online about the Glazers, they don't care about. They don't. The only thing that will ever hit them hard is if it hits their pockets.
Walk out.
And unfortunately, we're not a kind of a family club or a one city club that you can actually do that, because let's say half of the fan base don't want to go, or half the people that have tickets don't want to go. Do you really think that there's not another 100,000 people that want to get into that stadium, that people will sell those tickets for more?
You have 700 million fans, is it? 700 million around the world?
So that's what I'm saying. That's not going to work. So the whole point is, for me, I look at it as I need to be able to analyze the processes that are at the club, that despite the Glazers and what they do, can we put the processes in there that can make us successful? At the time of Ferguson, we had the process by way of the manager. Now we're trying to get the processes correct. We've mentioned at the very start of the show, the fact that it's only happened now is ridiculous, and it should have happened probably 15 years ago when it was first starting around European football. But look, we're here now. The process is slowly getting better. We've seen the improvements in the academy system, which is kind of a result of these processes that did start probably 3 years ago. And now it's time to start seeing some of those results in the first team. We've seen it with some of the recent recruitments. We've seen it with Bruno Fernandes. I've said it for a long time. The best player we signed since before Bruno was probably Cristiano. Because you can say Robin van Persie and all that, but everybody knew how good Robin van Persie was in the Premier League. So the fact is, that's a result of something that's changed in the recruitment model, because that wasn't happening. Yeah. So we've seen that now. We've seen we wanted to bring in Haaland. Okay, something happened in terms of the contract that didn't get it done. The target of Erling Haaland was correct. We've seen the same thing with Jude Bellingham. We've seen how good he's been. We've seen the same with Jadon Sancho. Jack Grealish. So you're seeing the players that are being identified are actually the correct players, but just because you identify a player doesn't mean that you're going to sign them. And that's what fans kind of need to understand is you can identify 5 players, but there's other circumstances that can mean that you're not actually going to get them. So my whole point is when you bring in these processes that if you don't get your first option, okay, then move down to the next one that has the same style. That's what good clubs do. That's what Juventus does. That's what Liverpool has been doing. That's what Bayern Munich does. And that's what Manchester United need to start doing. So when last summer we were like, well, we can't get Sancho, we should have moved on to the next player instead of waiting all summer to try and get Dortmund to change their price when they weren't going to. Look, it may work out a year later because probably Sancho's not going to sell for 120 million that they wanted. He'll probably go for 80 or 90. And then United will be like, well, we just saved money there. But then the problem is, well, he should have been here a year before. But my whole thing is, if you don't get your first option, you should be able to move to the next. That's what Liverpool did last summer. And they've done it so many other times. I know you've mentioned it many times, Haider, the whole idea with Julian Brandt and Mo Salah. That's the perfect example. Yeah. And that's what United need to get to. And for me, the announcement today is kind of like not exactly the first step, but it's the first step in us seeing the process being put into place. And I think that's really important.
Exactly. We're not saying, and there are a lot of people, I will admit, on Twitter going and thinking that this is everything suddenly fixed. We are not saying that. We don't say that on these shows. We're not that naive. But also the same sort of conversation he's had at people that say, well, nothing's going to change or the club's not doing anything. I've seen comments saying that we don't run like a football club. We don't. But when they're putting a director of football in place, give them a chance. Give them a chance to try.
You can't ask for something for 7 years and then moan about it when you eventually get it, can you? You can't do that. It doesn't make sense. You've been calling for this for 7 years, probably before, even when Ferguson was in charge. You've been calling for something like this model for years. Now you've got it. At least give it time.
Yeah.
At least, I think the biggest clue will be, Haider, when they employ the next manager. I think that'll be the biggest indication whether this is working, because we'll see who the next manager is. We'll see what he stands for, his philosophy, and we'll learn. We'll go from there.
And that's the key. Like my last one on this, guys. Look, fantastic comments. Thank you for all your comments as well. I can't say I agreed with all of them because there's a lot of look, I'm not expecting United to suddenly just become the best run club in the world. I'm not naive enough to think that. I'm not naive enough, and neither are my two good friends here, Ciaran and Joe. We're not naive enough to think that the Glazers, the Glazers don't have ulterior motives. We know that. But what we need to understand as well, and as a fan base, and we've become so bitter as a fan base, either side, Ollie in, Ollie out. After each game, it's almost as if one side wants to prove that they almost in some ways revel that United lost so they can just go and stick into the other side and vice versa. That's what our fan base has become. That's what we've become. We're so deprived of success that we've become just toxic. And that's what it is right now. It's toxic. And going on to Twitter and Zayn saying here, I'm a realist. Right. Well, great. You're a realist. Yeah. Average position, 5th or 6th. Great. We know what the problems are, but give it a chance. You're just completely shutting it down. And look, it's not a healthy mindset to be in. Look, you're entitled to your opinion, but when other people want to give it a chance, or when other people want to sit down and have a look at the pros and cons like we have tonight, and we have brought up some negatives here. Are the Glazers really going to treat this as a role? We don't know.
But
don't write it off immediately is what I'm trying to say. We know the issues with the Glazers. No one here supports it. Look, as a fan base, we've got to try to sit together. We got a technical director and a director of football in one day. Are they the ones that I would have chosen if I had to pick of anyone in the world? No, they aren't. Neither of them would be. But at least you know what now? I'm not sitting there thinking, right, Woodward's the one who's signing off on things, or he's the one who's got an influence with Ollie. It's now going to be Ollie, Murtagh, and it's going to be Fletcher. Is it going to be better? Are we going to buy the players that we want at the prices we want? No guarantee. And at that time, in 2 years' time, if you see no change, 3 years, 4 years' time, or if the next manager that comes in is someone of Jose Mourinho's ilk, that sort of style of football. I'm not talking about the reputation that he's got, because that's the key, as Joe said. If the next manager, let's say after Ollie, is someone like Nagelsmann, then you can say it's been a success. Why? Because the succession plan is a similar style of play. Will Nagelsmann be a success hit? There's no guarantee. Will Poch be a success hit? No guarantee. Will Ollie? No guarantee. But it's the idea of continuity. And look, I understand people don't want to get hurt. They don't want to have any hope. That's fine. But don't look, I'm not telling you what to do, but don't just immediately dismiss this and be like, oh, well, nothing's going to change, because you just don't know that. Like, it's the same way as someone saying, oh, it's going to be amazing, everything's fixed. We've got a few saying Erik ten Hag for manager. He'd be a great choice. But you got to think of these things further forward. It's not going to happen overnight. The Glazers aren't going to go either. So I don't think we'll win the title while they're here. I really don't.
I've always said, I think we have to be lucky in terms of players that have brought in have to hit the ground running. Youth players have to go through the manager that we bring in has to be really good. Where I completely agree with Joe is when he says whoever the next manager is. If the next manager comes in and it's someone like Diego Simeone, well, then something's going wrong, and it's the same that we've done before, because that doesn't fit what we're trying to do now, or even the recruitment model that we're doing now for both the academy and the first team. But like you said, even if it's not Nagelsmann, but if it's someone that likes to play that style, well, then you're like, okay, they've identified this person to be brought in. Well, then you're like, okay, well, there's a plan in place. While before, the plan was all over the place, where Moyes, 1 minute we want to do this. Exactly. And that's the biggest problem. And look, I know there's a lot of people that want to be overly critical about this, and they're probably annoyed that we haven't or can't do that. And the problem is we can't, because you can only be critical when you're able to analyze someone in their job. We can't analyze these people in their job because they've just started it today. And hopefully within, I don't even know if we can even do it within a year, but over time we can actually look at that and we can go back and see kind of, were there changes, or was this just a reshuffling and people being given different names of their roles? We're not going to know that though. And
and at that point, Ciaran, you can turn around. Yeah, and you can turn around at that point and say, yes. But I think, look, I understand where people are coming from. We're also scarred and we're hurt. As United Against Glazers said, we all love the club and feel hurt how it should. Absolutely. I've told you this right now, with everything that's going on in the world and everything, and I do struggle with mental health, really badly. These boys do know it. And United, for me at the moment, or it's meant to be such a enjoyment and release and just forgetting about everything that's going on. But I find at the moment it's actually one of the biggest stresses for me. And it really does, when I see United doing so poorly and when I see United struggling, it really messes me up, because I love this club so much. We all love this club so much. And look, in all honesty, myself and Joe disagree regularly about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, but I can see the good he's done, Joe. And you know this. Myself and Joe always go at it about Ole in the nicest way possible, But I think Ole does some fantastic stuff.
There's going to be an MMA fight coming up in the summer. So when all the lockdown is over, just everybody make sure that you get involved. It's going to be Joe versus Haider.
We're two different weight classes, mate. We're two different weight classes. Haider's like a featherweight compared to me. It wouldn't be fair, mate. I'd just crush him. I'd lay on him and crush him.
Oh man, that's brilliant. But no, that's the thing, myself and Joe disagree, but we find common ground, and I think I can definitely see his points, and I can see a lot of positive things that Ollie's done, but also and Joe shares some of my reservations as well, and they have started to become more evident. And Joe's turned around several times recently and said, I absolutely love Ollie, but there are slight reservations I'm starting to have, and I'm seeing things. And look, at the end of the day, we know the club aren't where they're meant to be. They have to be at the top. That's where United are meant to be. But we also have to look at the circumstances. Doesn't mean we're accepting them. but hashtagging and doing all of this just isn't doing anything for me. It has to be something more organized. It has to be something. We'll talk about it in our Glazer episode. We will do it 100%. And you'll see then none of us here are Glazer apologists. I've done thread upon thread upon thread, and I've been called all sorts of names for going in on the Glazers.
Can I just say something really quickly? Sorry, can I just say something? Just to add as well. If this structure works well, it's ironically, it hides the coach. It hides the coach a lot, because if this structure works well, it doesn't matter who the coach is. You'd expect to see the same sort of football week in, week out, because what you have is you have a particular type of player that you've recruited from the ground up. You've had a particular type of player that you've recruited based on a football philosophy that you want to have, and you have a coach in place that whoever the coach is, they play that type of football. So actually, what you're looking at is if this works. If Ollie gets second with this team, the next manager that comes in, if he was given the same players, gets second with that team the season after, because it's a style of football that works over time. It's a philosophy. And actually, the coach becomes less relevant in a well-run system like this, because actually it's all about the way you want to play and the players that you have on the pitch that can deliver that philosophy.
But that's what not excites me, but that's what gives me a bit of peace of mind. And like I said, look, if Murtagh and Fletcher turn out to be puppets and nothing changes, go in on the Glazers, go on everyone you want. Absolutely. Yeah. What I'm trying to say is that I'm not looking at this as what it's going to do for Ollie, because I think he's like, he's not going to be here for 10, 20 years. Let's be honest.
Towards the end.
I'm thinking about who comes in next. That doesn't mean I'm saying Ollie should get sacked. I'm actually looking at that long term, because if they go and manage to bag a manager like someone, I'm just saying like Nagelsmann, who's so highly rated, or Poch, or someone like that, and because of the structure as well in place, because that's the worry, isn't it? Who's going to come in? Who's going to come in next? That's what you got to think about. It's about continuity. That's what the big clubs do. I always say this, and I was worried about this, that if Ole Gunnar Solskjaer leaves tomorrow, let's say we didn't have this in place, you can say what you want about his tactics. He's stopped the rot. He's turned the club around. We're sitting second in the league. Yes, we want to be first, but the fact is that we were nothing like before he came in. Let's be honest with you. I'm not saying he's the best manager in the world. What I'm trying to say is that if he left tomorrow, everything would have gone with him. And then you're back at square one. At least if he leaves tomorrow, I'm not saying now, but in 6 months' time, well, then you know what? Murtagh will be very involved in the appointment of the next manager. Fletcher will be as well. There's a structure in place. There's a link between the board and whoever's the next manager. There's an academy that's churning out and developing some absolute gems. There's a pathway up from the academy. That's what direct football does. The pathway from the academy to the first team. They'll probably go and improve the way that we loan players out, which we've been rubbish at for years. All these things are encompassed. It's not about who we buy every single summer. That's what I'm trying to say. So, guys, look, honestly, we've gone over a bit. I'm just going to read out the last few comments. One here from Helly, who's an absolutely fantastic listener. Thank you so much for all your support as always. One of the highlights of lockdown has been and still are these podcasts that have popped up. I enjoy these so much if we don't agree on everything. Yeah, absolutely. Lakesh as well as someone, Alan, everyone, honestly, all the new listeners as well. You've been fantastic. I see everyone's view. I respect everyone's point of view. You can disagree, but we all love United at the end of the day. And that's the most important thing. Ciaran, Joe, thank you as always for joining me very much. Guys, make sure that you join myself and Rob on Sunday after West Ham game. We'll be doing another masterclass. Have a nice evening, and we will see you next time.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.